Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Lacini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode number 42. My guest is Dr. Craig Wright, my favorite professor during my time at Yale University in his course, Exploring the Nature of Genius. Dr. Wright holds an MA and PhD from Harvard. During his tenure at Yale, Dr. Wright served as a chair of the Department of Music and the academic director of online education. His online course, Introduction to Classical Music, is the largest online music course in the world. He has published several books on music and cultural history, the most recent being The Hidden Habits of Genius, an Amazon bestseller. Yale has recognized Dr. Wright's contribution to undergraduate teaching in its form of two most prestigious prizes, the Sowell Prize and the Devane Medal. He was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, an honorary doctorate from the University of Chicago, and in 2010 was elected a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Each time I speak with Professor Wright, I am taken back by his intelligence, kindness, and drive to discover new insights. I'm thrilled to share his brilliance with you. So without further ado, Dr. Wright, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, Mark, it's a delight to be with you. We're going to have a great discussion today, I'm sure, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Outstanding. So as I was preparing for this, before we dive into your career, your work on genius and peak performance, I want to start with your family. You've accomplished so much, from writing books to being one of the most esteemed teachers in the world. Yet you share with me what you're most proud of is your family. Why? What is it that your family's brought you that your life's work has not?
Well, as the years go on, my family gets larger and larger. I was thinking through this. I have four children. We have four children, and each of them is married, so that makes 8, and there are now 7 grandchildren. There'll probably be more coming along. That's a total by my even musician's calculation, about 15 people. So 15 people, and I spent a lot of my day but engaging with family. Just this morning, there was a message from one kid flying from here to here, hope you make your connection, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a large part of my existence, and it's a wonderful part of my existence. As you get older, many people said, your grandchildren are your great joy in life. But it's not only the grandchildren, your own children are your joys in life, and you learn so much for them. In my life, I think the thing that I have learned most from probably is not so much the academic environment, the professional environment that I've been in, but the personal environment, just working, learning through the situations, triumphs and tragedies, joys and sorrows of dealing now with a close cohort of 15 people. And they're all so different political philosophies, different sexual persuasions, and it's an opportunity to do so much and to learn so much from them. That might seem like a strange thing to say, but in a way that it provides the framework, the background for all of my professional thinking.
Outstanding. And I think this is going to be an omnipotent topic throughout, is the curiosity and the learning in our conversation. Before your marriage of 45 years to your wife, congratulations, by the way, and the existence of your kids and your grandchildren, what was life like growing up? Where are you from originally, and who were your earliest influences?
Yeah, well, I'm the personification of the American story. My parents were very middle class. My grandfather quit school. This is so typical of my generation. My grandfather quit school at age 13 to work on the Pennsylvania Railroad. His father worked on the Pennsylvania, and his father worked on this. Sometimes they would get killed. No, not killed. Getting train backs up the wrong way in Paoli, Pennsylvania. Ex-grandfather at that particular point. And on my mother's side, they were farmers from Iowa. So these were not wealthy people. At the end of the Second World War, my father had been in the military, as most American males had been one way or the other at that point. He was located around Washington, D.C. So I grew up in suburban Washington, D.C., but it was a very middle class household. At one point, I think we were even taking in roomers, tenants, in the house that we had, in order to help cover the bills. So, but they provided the basics of education. So this is, whatever I've accomplished, it's been through the hard work of my parents and my own hard work. So we can't underestimate the role of the importance of drive, and desire, and this ability to take advantage of all the wonderful things that the United States has, the opportunities that America brings with it. So I'm very much a beneficiary, a poster boy and a beneficiary of this particular system, opportunity and hard work in that sense.
Outstanding. Well, one of a character coach that I had one time said that it's typical of young boys, if you will, to grow up and become either nuclear explosions or nuclear power plants. And I love how you shared that you had this drive and desire. Yeah. And I kind of want to ask you a question on when that got channeled. So during lunch earlier this year, when you and I were speaking, you expressed your love for music and piano. And when did that start? When did that desire get channeled into music and piano?
Well, there's something you said just a moment ago that really interested me, Mark, and that was, well, you don't know whether they're going to be a nuclear physicist or a nuclear explosion. It's very important, I think, to be a little of both, because if you're too focused, and you're not slightly crazy or slightly wild in what you're doing, and if you're not getting in trouble as a youngster, maybe you're not pushing the envelope enough. Maybe you're pushing at the boundaries of what things could be. And as a kid, I can remember, being curious. We would this is a completely different tape, but we would get on our bicycles and we would drive like whole towns away, and we would go out first thing in the morning, and we would come back, usually sometimes bleeding, back in time for dinner. That's kind of the way it was. It's a lot different now. So I think the opportunity to go out there and explore, and in a way, I think that's genetic in many ways. And I've watched it differently with different children. And I watch it with different grandchildren. Some are very timorous and shy about and slightly fearful of the world, and others are absolutely dangerously fearless. And watching a 2-year-old that is, and I, for example, when I was 3, I was run over by a car because my mother wasn't paying attention, and I was one of these kids. And then one time, I'm out there in the street and opening car doors and kind of going from. That's how they tracked me down. But I really was hit by a car and had a fractured skull in Iowa City, Iowa. And I watched the same kind of thing happen with this one grandchild who he's tall, he's strong, and he's just going to figure out how to get out that gate, no matter how many strings you tie around it, and be out in the street, and it scares the heck out of it, because you got to watch these kids. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to be blowing up the nuclear power plant or be that nuclear explosion, because it says that maybe you have instinctively or genetically this desire to get out there and explore things.
Right. I would just add to that, because I'm on the same wavelength as you. When you look at personality and you take, for instance, someone's openness score, if that's very high, along with low neuroticism, a generalized proclivity to negative emotion, and high extroversion, now you have a cocktail of someone who's willing to go out there and explore and be more prone to play, and be more being that nuclear explosion rather than the power, if you will.
And play writ large is hugely important. I mean, it's just experimentation, engagement, that's all involved in what we say play. You asked me a question a moment ago we didn't follow up on, Mark, and that's the following. That when did I become passionately enamored with music? And the answer that will perhaps shock you is I never really did. This was, in a sense, this was a job. I was my whole, people, I'm sure you run into people all the time that are kind of jack of all trades, but master of none.
Sure.
So I was pretty good at this. I was pretty good at baseball. I was pretty good at better than pretty good at playing the piano, and I had good but I did not have a good ear. I did not have any really natural proclivity for this, but I had a strong work ethic. I knew how to discipline myself. I could practice. I could pay attention. I could benefit from what my teachers told me. And therefore, I got ahead, and I kept getting ahead and kept being the best kid in my neighborhood, and then the best one of the best in the city of Washington D.C. in terms of piano performance. So off they shipped me to the Eastman School of Music. But then I had graduated from single A through double A into triple A, and I was in the big leagues at the Eastman School of Music, where all the hot shots were. And it was very clear after a year or so there that those were the kids with absolute pitch, very strong music memory. They could hear a piece once and go keyboard and play it back. They had a kind of instantaneous hand-eye coordination. They could see a note, and they even hear a note in their mind as they're looking at a score and immediately go to the right key on the violin or the piano. So it's at that point that a door starts to close. I see that, I'm not going to be the next Van Cliburn. I better figure out plan B here. So then plan B became, and my father, after his association with the military, although he continued to work at the Pentagon on and off for years, he was a professor of business administration at the University of Maryland. And I had watched the lifestyle that we had come as this middle class family begins to rise into the upper middle class, as the benefits of being in a university environment. And there was an opportunity to learn, to hang around with and be associated with exciting things, smart kids. And there was a very strong sports program at the University of Maryland. The football team was a big deal. The basketball team was a big deal. And I used to go up there and I would sell Cokes at halftime at the University of Maryland football games. You go in with maybe $3 and you buy a tray of 30 Coca-Colas, and you go out there and you sell them, and you make the arbitrage between your purchase price and your sales price. It's been an entrepreneurship at an early age. So that was part of it. But if you were not, but maybe some kid beat you up and took your money afterwards or something. That never really happened. But it wasn't a foolproof situation. Or maybe you stumbled going down those steps and you dropped your entire tray, and there goes your days. So, but again, you got to take the chances. You got to be willing to take chances in life if you have a larger vision. And that's probably what that was part of too. So it was a wonderful environment, and we happened to be situated physically right next door. Our property abutted the property of the University of Maryland. So I had free range over there, including the golf course and the golf program, where I worked in the driving range and caddied and all this stuff. So I learned all about golf at that particular time, and I got to meet some people that became pretty good professional players. So that was part of all of this too. It was a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of a situation in a university. So I knew that after being a professional pianist had washed out, it was a very good life to be had as a college professor. And I still adhere to that. It has enormous advantages. It has some only mild disadvantage. A mild disadvantage is a very limited income. You don't get rich, but you can get rich if you're enough do well if you're an entrepreneur in your own profession, because you can consult, you can write books, you can write textbooks. that kind of thing. So there is opportunity there as well. But the big advantage of being in a university situation, any academic situation, is that essentially after say 5-6 years, if you work your way to tenure, unless you get involved in some kind of financial peculation or moral escapade, or then you have a job for life, and you can pretty much do whatever you want to. If things interest you, you can craft courses and a curriculum that serves in effect, and it seems shameless to say this, self-serving, it serves as a mechanism where you can satisfy your own curiosity. You can carve out courses, things, well, we should study this. And I'm sure it's the same way in the science too. I mean, these guys have labs, everybody up there in science, in social sciences, in psychology, everybody. I don't think you're anybody unless you have a lab. So they all have labs. But what they're doing is, well, this could work or this could work. They have a vision. They have things, well, I'd like to learn about that. And they get the money together and hire people to work for them. So you could be a teacher and I could get, say, teaching assistants that would be working for me, and they might have to do some research from time to time or help with the teaching and so on. So that's the real advantage of a university situation for the faculty, is that you're given all these bright young people and you learn from those students too. So many wonderful ideas, just as I'm still learning from you today, Mark. Learn from the students, and you are given the opportunity to explore whatever you want to explore.
Well, I'm happy that you chose that route after the pianist didn't work out. I just want to backtrack because I was tracking you the whole time, and a book that came to mind was "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," and I thought about that as you were talking about moving up the food chain, if you will, in piano. That came to mind, and then another book that's one of my.
So that's called. I'm going to write that down. What got you here
won't get you there. What got you here won't get you there. And another idea that came to mind was one of my favorite books to talk about is Legacy, which is the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. And there's a chapter in the book that says, when you're at the top of your game, change your game. It's like, why? Right. And it's always that evolution and evolving, just because you will finally come against competition that has done every single thing that you've done up along that way. And now what's going to be the separating factor? Always somebody, especially if you're at the summit, that's coming for you. Right. And my question is going to dovetail into learning again, right? Because I'm so curious as to who your earliest influences were, your earliest teachers, the greatest teachers you've had, because I know, and it's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on here, is because I learned so much from you and the mentors that I have. Who would you point to as those in your life?
Well, everybody would have to say that their parents were huge influences in their life, for good or for ill, and sometimes for ill. I mean, let's be honest here. Sometimes you can learn a lot just by watching, say, your father's behavior and think, I'm never going to do that. That's wrong. That kind of thing. But it was an environment where I was taught the value of hard work, and I think that's important. We had chores, we had things we had to do, we had responsibilities, we had certain benchmarks that were set, and we had to meet those benchmarks. But aside from the family, I was thinking about that the other day. There were two teachers that I had. One was a piano teacher early on. He wasn't a very good pianist. But he was an interesting character. He had an old Ford automobile that he was a college student at the University of Maryland, and he was doing this kind of to earn extra money. So and he needed to put together a studio of people that he'd give lessons to pay the bills. Ted Brown was his name, and he had an old Ford automobile. I remember this so distinctly, that we would ride around in town, and I forget why I was in his car riding around town. But when you wanted to make a turn, you didn't have a signal that you could switch on a switch. You had to have something fell out of the side of the car, but his were a bit sticky. So every time you wanted to turn, you had to bang on this side of the car to get this signal to go out, this arm to go out there to tell you
It
the
sounds
car.
like only a nuclear explosion here. It sounds like only a nuclear
This is
explosion.
a nuclear explosion. But here's the cool thing that this guy did. Had nothing to do with music, though maybe it did. He set up for youngsters. He was very much interested, and he made his career not as a piano teacher, ultimately as a public school pedagogue. He was extremely well known in Southern Maryland. He died 4 or 5 years ago. He made a reputation as a pedagogue. And one of the things that he did, and I'll never forget this because I learned so much and I still value this today, he set up a chess club. And he and my father had finished off our basement in suburban Maryland there. And my father said, okay, we can use this. So Ted Brown would get whatever kids wanted to learn to play chess. And to be direct, in those days, it was mostly boys rather than girls. I just think that was the default assumption back in those days. Now it would be completely different. What is it, Queen's Gambit or something that we watch on TV. So that has changed. But the important thing here was he taught me how to play chess, and he taught all these other people how to play chess. And chess requires a disciplined, highly highly concentrated executorial front center lobe powers of execution. You've got to think through patterns. You've got to remember patterns. You've got to see ultimately long-term repercussions of your actions. And that was really, in retrospect, really cool. And I still play chess with my grandson. Sometimes we play chess online. There's an online chess club.
How old were you? How old were you when you?
I think it was at 10 or 12. Because I know I was still in that house. And that was about the age of the kids. So I was pretty good at that too, but not really good. So that was one teacher. Then when I got to the Eastman School of Music, lo and behold, I was taking courses in the humanities. And if you were at a music school, we had one course called history. We had one course called science. That was it. And the rest, that was kind of it. And the rest were all music courses. So I was taking the course on history, but it was taught by this really interesting guy who was a Yale graduate. And he was a phenomenal pianist. He was far, far better pianist than I ever. He used to be a professional accompanist. He was the accompanist for Anna Russell, for Aldo Periso, who was a famous cellist there at Yale. And he would travel around the world as an accompanist. But he had been in a program at Yale called History, Arts, and Letters, and it was like directed studies. When you were there, Mark, it was intensely. If you were taking 5 courses in a semester, 3 of them would be in this program. So it was a huge front loading of humanity. Well, as it says, history, arts, and letters. At the same time, he's taking all this piano stuff. So when he was teaching me about history, this guy, although he was a trained pianist, knew a huge amount about these other disciplines. And he would send me off to do these research projects. Eastman School of Music is about 5 miles away from its affiliate, the University of Rochester. But the University of Rochester had a good library. So I would take the bus over to the library and I would do research over there. I think I was the only kid at Eastman that ever did any research in University of Rochester library. But it was that guy's, he was, I don't know, it was just, it was kind of cool. I mean, he was a married guy, I think, with 5 daughters himself, a young man, about 34 at that time when I was 19 or 20. But he was very influential because he opened the door to me to these other disciplines that hadn't been open to me before. And he also encouraged me to apply for what then, and I think it still exists, the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, which was a big deal fellowship. It would be like being a Google Scholar or something today. And that if you got one of those, any graduate school in the country would take you. because it was a full payment of your tuition through your entire graduate program, et cetera, et cetera. It was really a wonderful thing. So they were looking for, in a sense, the best and the brightest. And I was fortunate to be picked out of a very unusual place, the Eastman School of Music, for one of these basic humanities fellowships. So there, in that case, there's somebody that kind of took me under his wing. I didn't really realize that he was doing that. And I'm sure that he realized that he was doing that at the time. It was just something that seemed to be cool. So it could happen, we could explore this topic. I want you to go over there in the library and see what you can find out about this. So that was fine. So those were two people in my life. They were both sort of fish out of water, but they were, and maybe I had an affinity with them because I intuited that they were interested in far broader things than what one might think.
Yeah, I couldn't help but thinking about the entire time, curiosity again. And I want to ask you if you feel that curiosity that you had to go to the University of Rochester Library all alone was something that you've always had, or did somebody instill, is that part of the hard work and work ethic that you
I wish I could say it's all part of the hard work thing, but I do, as I said before, when looking at these youngsters, because I've had some children and grandchildren that don't seem particularly curious at all, shockingly uncurious, and others that are dangerously curious. And so I think in a large measure, I mean, what you hope to do then as a parent is to encourage, maybe give even more opportunities, and maybe insist a little bit more with those that seem uncurious. Be a really good thing if, let's assume you afford, that you would go off to sleepover camp in the wilds of Maine, or maybe a nature, a month-long nature whitewater rafting project camp in Maine or in Wyoming, because you tend to want to. I mean, you don't say this to the child, but this is the back chatter. This child tends to spend too much doing computer programming in a particular, in their room. It would be good to get them out there with others, fresh air, exercise, natural environment, different sorts of experiences. Other kids, and again, teenagers, you have to rein them in. They got too many options, and sometimes it's because it's expensive. I've had a case just this summer. Parents signing a grandchild up to go off to their traditional. I don't want to do that anymore because I've made it to this point in the swimming competitions, and I'm going off to Stanford to swim this summer at their swimming summer camp. But we put all this money down for you to go to that camp. No, so sometimes it's this extreme, and generally speaking, if the parents think that this is important for the development of the child, they will back it.
A story that came to mind is during one of our graduate applied sports psychology courses, there was this coach from a Division II school in Long Island, New York, who came and he shared this story. And it was of a student who said, "I really want to come to your school." And he was a track coach. And the coach said, "Well, what are your times?" And the times were not good. They were not good. And sure enough, the coach turned him away, and the kid got in on his own. And he showed up at his track office and he said, I want to be part of the team. I want to be part of the team. And long story short, that athlete walked onto the team and ended up being an Olympian. And it revolutionized that coach's first question to those who he was recruiting to: would you still run here if we didn't have a track and field program? Right? Because he saw the most important thing, which is something that you and I have talked about in the past, just the joy for the process, right? Yeah. Would you still go outside and run if there was no track out there, right? And then that's what that coach saw in that young individual. And I bring that up because in your book, The Hidden Habits of Genius, you have that chapter on developing a lust for learning. Dr. Ellen Winter would call this a rage to master. And you just find you find that every now and then in individuals who can't live without it. Does that provoke anything in your mind?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Fortunately, we've got a situation here. We're talking about swimming and track where we can quantify progress.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more difficult to do, say, on the piano. You can do it, yeah, but it's not. A time is a time, and yes, but the thing with the daughter, the granddaughter, and the swimming is that her time she could see, and she swims. She really is into this, and she's swims seriously off about half the time, maybe all the time now, under the watchful eye of a coach as she is training. Her times get better and better. She works really hard at it. Her times get better and better. The parents are a little bit worried that she's working so hard on the athletic that she's not paying quite as much attention as she might to the academic, neglecting the academic. And she could do fine, and she is doing fine academically, but she's not, knocking it out of the park. But the thing that and I actually, now I think about it, I gave my phone to my wife, but I could pull up an email I had back. This youngster qualified to go out there to Stanford, and there was some big meet before that somewhere in California. And I said, well, this is really impressive, because nobody in your family, we can barely float, nobody in your family has ever done anything like this. What drives you? And she says, well, I like what I'm doing. It gives me joy. And I can see my times improve. So she sees a direct correlation between hard work and improvement. And I think that brings her joy, the improvement. But then the question is, what would happen? Do you ever run into a situation, Mark? You ever have this happen where somebody would not be improving, would still love? Is that the sign to you? That was kind of the sign to me at the Eastman School of Music. But is not bettering those times a sign to you that maybe you should pay a little more attention to academic studies, or as I did, figure out how you can become a college professor rather than a professional pianist? Is the joy in seeing yourself always get better, or is it the intrinsic experience of the exercise, or the sport, the activity itself? I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's a couple things that come to mind. One, I think when you put walls up in front of an individual like that and it's not improving, that'll immediately show the desire, right? You'll either find a way to get around or through that wall. And then the second idea is someone I've had on here who started strength and conditioning in America at Nebraska University is Boyd Epley. And on his website, he has something called Pearson's Law, which is when something is measured, it improves. When something is measured and reported back, the rate of improvement accelerates. So there has to be something inside of accountability, inside of measuring it, that you come to understand the mechanics and on how to improve it. And then the third and final idea that I learned on a phone conversation with Anson Dorrance, UNC women's soccer coach, this is his quote. He said, average athletes want to be left alone. Good athletes want to be coached. Great athletes want the truth. So inside of that, whatever passion, hobby, interest, right? I think it's very clear in psychology that you can't choose to be interested in something, right? Something grips you or it doesn't, right? And I think inside of that, you'll start to understand that, yeah, I really want this or I don't. So then that's when you have to make that decision either to pivot, move on to a new venture, or to lean into the discomfort and really figure it out.
Yeah, that's all very, all those points are good ones, very good ones. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, there are a couple that I'd like to follow up on. Pearson's law, and then the reporting back. It says you report back a score, and they will improve, or you do better, and they improve. And you report them back, and they'll probably improve even more. Wasn't that the gist of it? Yeah. Okay.
The rate of improvement accelerates.
Okay. So then that says that there's an element of empathy here, that there's an element that somebody, it's reported to other people, and possibly, and that the individual their self-esteem is growing because other people have more self-esteem for them. That's they begin to see themselves, and others are seeing them as this. That's part of their persona at this point. This person's really good at this. I admire that person for this. That's one aspect of this. Here's another aspect of it, and I'm thinking about with regard to a particular activity. And I think about this, strangely enough, about golf. But I was thinking about, as you were talking, about basketball. And the notion, almost of a Zen notion, of the absolute perfect act. Perfection. I'm sure soccer players would have it too. Now, my notion of that would be a very simple one with a basketball court. Let's say you're playing point guard, you're coming down, you get screen here, you hit back up and hit a fadeaway jumper that from about 35 feet out, that just goes up over everybody's head and comes down perfectly swish in the basket. That's almost an aesthetic thing. It's almost a perfect vision of this. Now, in golf, there you are. It used to be maybe 180 yards out. Now it's only 140 yards out. 140 yards out. You pick out. Let's back up. Make this not quite as embarrassing as it is. You're 160 yards out, and you pull out a 4-iron. And those low irons are hard to hit in golf. Remember the famous Trevino line, but even God, what was it? Even God can't hit a 1-iron or something like that. Yeah, you're in a lightning storm and you're trying to hold up a low iron, and Lee Trevino says, "Well, even God can't hit a 1-iron." So you've got one of these low irons, and you hit this ball that flies off of this green background, and it goes up into the air, and in that background is a beautiful blue sky. It's going across a pond of water in which the wind is blowing, and the ripples on this pond, and there in the background is this thing, this green. It's all beautiful green. We have basic relationships with both blue and green colors, and there's the pin, and the ball hits right in the front of that green and rolls up toward the pin. It doesn't go in the pin, that would be hallucinatory, but it goes up very, very near the pin. Now that's a beauty. The kind of concept of that is so perfect and so otherworldly in a way that I think people are drawn to that. And I think that's in large measure why even old people continue to play golf. It's a total waste of time. I mean, it's great exercise. Pulling balls out of the water and things like that. It's great exercise. But I think it's because what happens once or twice in the course of, say, 4 to 5 hours playing golf is you have these sort of almost mystical experiences. So I don't know. I have never developed this kind of mystical experience of the moment of Zen perfection in sports. But it's worth thinking about because I think it does exist.
Well, there's a psychologist by the last name of Vygotsky, and he came up with a term called the zone of proximal development. And interestingly enough, how he came to this diagram, if you will, you can look it up, the zone of proximal development, is he was very interested in how kids learn how to speak. So when a kid first is growing up, from baby to young child, it speaks every phoneme possible. And then through culture and society, it loses how to speak the other languages. right? So North America English and
I
other.
really have to know about that, because that same kid that's racing out probably right now, trying to get over that fence, has that same, you watch with a 2-year-old, it sounds like this, like the speaker on your television is broken. It's
Mm,
this kind of rumble of all of these sounds. It's getting better and better. It's getting clearer and clearer. And so what you're saying is what he might be doing is jettisoning these other languages.
exactly. So part of the most fascinating thing inside of psychology is figuring out what's irrelevant. That's more important. Figuring out what's more irrelevant. So if you're looking to fall asleep in an area that you don't necessarily fall asleep, say you're on the road, a hotel, a random house, let's say, you're more likely to stay in sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, or
Mhm,
freeze,
mhm,
because
mhm.
you don't necessarily know what's out there, right? But if you go to your own home, to your own bed, it's very easy to get into parasympathetic nervous system rest and digest because
Mhm.
there's more certainty of surroundings. Now, backtracking inside of children learning from babble to speech, what Vygotsky came to understand is they learned how to speak at a rate that was slightly below that, right? So you've had people say to you, or you've heard them say, don't speak to me like I'm a child. Really, it means you're speaking slower or you're using layman's
I
terms, or
see.
right?
That's interesting. I never thought of that. Yeah.
As the
It's almost demeaning when you start to, even with an adult, slowing down, like you're so that only a child could understand this. Yeah. Yeah,
So the
that's
concentric
important.
circles are, the middle one is you can do it unaided. Then as you go out, you can do it with slight help. The most fascinating thing, and the reason why I even brought this up, Dr. Ray, is because that zone of proximal development is what the athlete goes through, is what the pianist goes through when they're going above and beyond in a particular performance. And that's the zone. It's what they can do unaided plus, if you're watching it, you know what that looks like. It's flow. It's the zone of proximal development. Even that musician or that artist, if you will, because that's really what they are when they're going along the boundaries. That's the first thing you said when I brought up nuclear explosion or power plant is you have to leave some room for chaos. You have to leave at that boundaries, play at the boundaries. That's the zone of proximal development, going to that next concentric circle. And I find that fascinating, right? And I really want to bring this back, and I'm sure you have something to say about that. I really want to bring this back to your transition from music to Mozart to genius, because you were able to see the connectivity there and then go to another level. So if some way or another you can connect that, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, let me backtrack just to one thing where you left off at a very important point. To get to that next level, level that is really the top of the line, which I never was able to get to. You probably, 1 in 100, maybe one in 1,000 ever get up to that. Obviously, it's dependent upon discipline and numbers of people participating in a particular sport or activity. But we'll say we're the upper 0.5%, that kind of thing. To get there, why don't the others that have worked hard, that have had the same advantages, the same quality of teaching, at practice, just as much, the same work ethic, why don't they make it into that upper 5%? And I think there are barriers, and we could talk about the barriers before that, before we go into what we were saying, but just a second ago, where we should go. There are barriers to that upper 5%, and I think we could just spend a minute talking about those. But even if you reach that barrier and you can't get, then at that point, that's plan B time. And you can do one of two things. You can say, my life is over, it's ruined, I never will be anything. Or you'll say, oh, I learned a lot from that. That was a good experience. How can I take these particular skills that I have learned through this failure and apply them in another way? So,
Hmm.
but it's interesting. So many interesting things you brought up here, Mark, today. We were talking. Oh, I'm going to go. I'm going to go off in a direction that's probably not helpful there. So there are these the there are these barriers, and I could talk, and it's probably the same thing in sports, but I know that they are in music. One thing that's hugely important in all of this kind of thing is nerves, and that's where I met my Armageddon. Um, where I fell down was my sympathetic nervous system was highly uh, um, susceptible to nerves. I would get very nervous. And I used to tell, that's the way I explained it to myself, I was one of the world's greatest practice piano, or did, warm up pianists, and a catastrophe when I got out there. It's just, so why? Why is that the case? I think that's, you shouldn't, but that's the kind of thing that we talk about in sports psychology. I'm sure you've got to tune out the audience. You've got to get into your own zone, as you were saying. You've got to you've got to imagine how this could unfold, and it's going to unfold well. You don't want to think about this could go, this is particularly relevant when playing the piano. Oh, I just messed up that bass pattern down there. That triad wasn't really accurate. You don't want to forget, that's past history. We got to look forward. We have to wall out. We have to get in our own zone. But I didn't have any of the benefits of that sports psychology then. So I was highly susceptible to the sympathetic nervous system that was causing my cortisol and my adrenaline and whatever to just make my hands shake. And if you're playing these instruments, or maybe hitting a 5-foot putt to qualify for the U.S. Open, and you're tied, you're one stroke off the cut line, then it helps to have these kinds of psychological, this kind of psychological training, so that you are able to get into that upper 5%. That's where the sports psychology, I think, could be very beneficial. But the whole field that you're developing here, that you're working in, didn't exist, back in my day. And my parents, being middle class, they thought that I would not need a sports psychologist. Just need a regular psychiatrist if I thought they were going to pay any money for a sports psychologist. Mm-hmm. So all of those points, what is it that prevents us from getting to that upper 5%? And then if we don't get there, what do we learn from not getting? How can we turn that into an advantage?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is when I was first introduced to sports psychology at Yale, I saw it as what to do in the micro moments, strategies such as get to your breath, trust the next play. That's the only play that matters. Have this vision that's more floodlight than flashlight, right? More mindful of the whole surroundings. Always relaxing yourself with a breath. Those sort of ideas.
May I interrupt with a question here? Who was teaching you that? I mean, I know all those guys in the psych department, but I didn't really realize.
We had a mental performance coach come in.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So they weren't doing it. This was so new that it hadn't been done yet.
Right. And then as I got deeper and deeper into sports psychology, I started to focus more on the depth and the integrative approach of things, which had more to do with belief system and core values and purpose, and how you win the match or the game or the performance way before it happens, right? So, I'll just use peak performers like Simone Biles, great gymnast. She calls pressure sets. So when she's practicing, she puts the same amount of pressure as she would be experiencing, and there's consequences, right? And I think of the Tiger Woodses, whose father grew up, he was a Green Beret, his father, and was always jiggling keys in his backswing, right? There's pressure for you. And then
how interesting.
Always performing under pressure. And then there's kickers in the NFL that no matter what, they put blaring music right next to them as they're kicking in practice to experience that 80,000, people screaming. So I think it really comes down to finding a way to prepare so that you have inner peace when you're out on the field, and training in such a way that mimics what you will experience. That's the best way I could answer that. And when you make the joke about being a practice pianist, I think there might be something inside of that where it wasn't the exact training that was to be expected in front of a group or audience. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, and very much so. And there are ways that you can, as the years go on, you can figure out how to work around these kinds of things. And you and I have talked about this before. You know, like having a routine, the things that you can do that sort of take you that ward off the exterior forces that would otherwise get in your way. And you can watch these professional golfers and guys like Rory McIlroy, who has in his traveling team a sports psychologist with him, and that tennis player, wonderful tennis player, the Polish young woman, Ida Swiatek, I think is her name. She's the number one at the moment, the number one female tennis player in the world. She has a sports psychologist also, but they give you these sort of little tips, and one of them is the whole idea of a routine. Like McIlroy will wander around looking at this putt from all sides, even though it might be he knows it's perfectly straight. It is perfectly straight. There's not a centimeter, a centime worth of break here, but he's still got to go bend down, look, and go over here. Then caddy has to come and stand in front. He has to look at it. He has to spread his legs to get this tripod. They go through this whole thing, and what they're doing is it's not his turn to putt yet. They're just filling so that the nerves don't set in. They're just going through other activities, I think. So because they're doing this, they can't be doing that, and that is bad because that is worrying about things that could happen, things you shouldn't be thinking about.
And I think those are they become things that they can do unconsciously, and those routines. When I'm speaking to an audience, I'll use these examples like, what's your middle name? What street did you grow up on? What's your cell phone number? Right? Those are things that you're quickly can snap off because you've had so many repetitions and those are routine to you, if you will. And that's what you're speaking of when you use McIlroy's example.
Yeah. Well, so those are the kinds of mental tricks, some of the sorts of things that one can do in order to get oneself in a better stage to perform at the highest, as you say, with the highest level of performance, because that's what we all want to do, whether we're public speakers, CEOs of corporations have to give public speeches and are not comfortable in that environment, the whole sorts of things. And I've learned this as a public speaker over the years, all sorts of wonderful things that you can do that will get you out of your nervous zone and into your peak performance zone.
Do you want to share any of those?
Yeah, sure. We could talk about those. But these are probably well known, but I didn't really come to realize it until late in the game. And one of the interesting things is there is the inverse relationship between size of audience and nerves. I get more nervous in front of a group of 10 than I do in front of a group of 1,000. I don't think I've ever spoke in front of more than 1,000. I think at Tanglewood in that Ozawa Hall there, it seats about 1,000. So I don't think so I'm not Trumpian in my public speaking aspirations here. So it's just this small group. I don't know why, just having people up close to me and watching me. So what I do, even no matter what the size of the thing, I just begin to try to see them as not individual faces, but as a sea of people. But at the same time, you have to watch these people because you have to watch their eyes, you have to watch their mouth to see where they're paying attention, whether they're smiling, because those are your signs it's time to move on to the next point, or it's stay and play with this while they're really interested in hearing more about this, elaborate here. But in terms of nerves, I think that's one thing generally. Try to see this, try to wall out individual faces. Another thing is wall out people that you know and whom you respect and know will be judging you. Wall out your friends, your family, that sort of thing. That doesn't mean don't allow them into the hall, but just don't have them come sit right up front, right in front of you. Just have them kind of say, okay, you can come back, sneak in the back door and hang around the back, and so I don't see you, kind of thing. You can suggest that. You want to be polite about it, but you can suggest that, because you want to come out there as if nobody is judging you. It's just you. Nobody. It could be 1,000 people out there, but you're not affected by the reaction of any one individual. Okay, first, in terms of the other obvious things about public speaking, first thing to do is trust human empathy. People do and respond, and you see this all the time with adults and children in particular. If somebody laughs or somebody does it, I was watching the end of the Tour de France the other day. The winner held up his 2-year-old child, and everybody was clapping. Jonas, I don't know, Vingegaard from Denmark. Okay, he's up there and he's dressed in his yellow suit, and all the people in the Champs-Élysées are clapping because he's just won this incredibly arduous, God is it arduous, Tour de France bicycle race. I mean, it's literally over the top in terms of the physical demands and mental demands too. God, can you imagine going down this mountain at 65 miles an hour and one skid of your tire? It's just off the charts. In any event, this baby, the crowd is clapping, and the father then, in a gesture of empathy with the crowd, he claps kind of like this out to the thank you for thanking me. And then the baby, who hasn't been there, just kind of off his own, starts to clap. Now, how does this child, it's just this kind of human empathy. So what do you do in terms of public speaking? When you arrive there, the first thing that you do when you step on the stage is you tell a joke. And you tell a joke that is self-deprecatory. And my shtick always was, I'm here to talk about genius, but stick around. You'll find out that I'm no genius. Or I'll tell you, to tell a story about all the dumb things I've always done, because I don't think I am a genius. But then, so tell a joke that gets people to laugh, because then they bond with you. And you're all on the same level. And relaxation, as laughter, as neuroscientists would be very quick to tell us, is a way of lowering immediately stress. Out goes the cortisol, out goes what is that enzyme? Amylase enzyme. It's one of these stressor enzyme. Out goes the adrenaline, and in comes maybe the dopamine and other kinds of things, and everybody is feeling good about themselves. So that laughter is very important. So if you can self-deprecate and you can get your audience to laugh with you, then that's almost half of the battle. They're with you at that point, and that's what you want.
Outstanding. I can't help but think, as you were speaking like that, you brought up nerves and you speak about self-deprecating. Has any of that played a role as to why you love and have studied and understood genius at such a deep level?
No, not so much. I think it's more a question of just being. I've always been interested in people, I guess, and I never really realized that. But in biography, give me something to, what I love to do is read books about Winston Churchill. I know he's a racist, but he's a very interesting. I mean, and he's talk about economic equality. Well, that'd be the last thing the world has ever won. But he's a hugely interesting human being with a lot of really wonderful characteristics. And one could argue, he did sort of save the Western civilization from destruction in the 1940s, or at least played a significant role in that. So I like reading biography. I like reading about people, different sorts of people, and trying to, when you read these things, you hope to learn from them. So it's another human laboratory in a way. like your grandchildren are and like your children are. If you're curious, you can set up these different laboratories, and you can go in and watch. And that's why it's useful not necessarily to be a specialist in a particular area, but by being a generalist. If I were looking for somebody to be CEO of a corporation, I would sure as heck go after the guy that's going 1,000 miles wide rather than 1,000 miles deep, because I think you've got to be able to make critical judgments based on a disparate variety of material. You've got to understand the human dimension in all of this. And you have to have a broad range of knowledge, and that may be more valuable than having a great deal of specific knowledge if you're going to run a company that has to engage with enterprises 24/7 around the world. So that's another part of this that I think is important. In terms of the Genius book, it was more a question of, what can I learn from these people? I'm curious about these people. And it was Mozart. He was very, very interesting. He did some really weird, crazy kinds of things, and he had all these strange talents. And then I started reading about Leonardo da Vinci, because I happened to be in Florence doing some research on Gregorian chant and looking at manuscripts of Leonardo da Vinci and seeing a similarity there, and then reading about Einstein and stuff like that. So that's how I got interested. I kind of transited from music to genius, and now more recently I'm transiting from genius to relaxation. In the Genius book, I think it's chapter 13 of that book, it's just now relax or something like that. So, because I was stunned by the number of high-level performances. If you want to have a great idea, if you want to come up with a solution to a problem, mathematical problem, problem in chemistry, problem in physics, any kind of problem that you're working on. As a writer, I would sit here and how am I going to organize this? What's the solution to the proper structure of topics within this? Or what does that have to do with that? The best thing you can do is stop concentrating and go out into nature and take a walk. Relax. Find an environment where you can totally reset. And you know a lot about this neuroscience too, Mark. You work off of that executive center front activity, and you swing it around all the way to the default mode network in the back of the brain that, interestingly enough, links up with the cerebellum. So you have kind of relaxation and emotion and exercise. So if I want to come up with a solution, and this is how I got onto this, and whether it's Tesla or Einstein or Dickens, I could just go through 50 people. They go out and Beethoven's out there with a sketchbook all the time, wandering around the woods of Vienna. That's where they get their ideas. It's not sitting at their desk trying to come up with a solution. So the relaxation as a part of thinking is very important, both in execution in sports, and I think in execution in a lot of cerebral activities in the world, and execution in music. I've told you the story before that I've got this dumb pet trick where I can, as Mozart was able to do, reach backwards over my hand, play upside down, play the piano upside down and backwards. But I can only do that if I think about where my hands are supposed to go. If I just take a deep, deep breath, as you were saying, breathing, and say, Craig, you know this stuff. You can do this backwards. Just hear the music in your head. You know how to have a vision of the perfection of this music, and just relax and let it go. And that kind of thing, that kind of try to give yourself an opportunity in life to switch from the executive mode to the default mode network, which means the relaxation mode, will actually solve, kind of unwind you, untwist things, whether it's on the athletic field or in the corporate world, unwind things and let your mind reset so that you're refreshed and you can come back with new insights into whatever solution you're trying to come up with.
Well, you were doing that on day one of class playing it upside down. And
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, I told you it's a dumb pet trick.
I knew I was going to like this guy, and I could speak very highly, and I will, about your book, The Hidden Habits of Genius. I highly recommend it to everyone listening, and I could talk to you for hours about each one of those geniuses and go inside of that. The questions I want to ask you, to be conscious of your time, are probably two or three more. And the first one would be, what is something you now know that you wish you knew when you were first teaching as a young professor?
Um, I've learned the most important thing I think I've learned in my life has to do with children and people. I think I've come to have a much more profound respect for the diversity of people and the values of diverse people. I had, through the process of children, I made a mistake. I made a mistake with the oldest child, a boy, who I kind of thought, well, this is what boys do, and this is how you should behave, and this is how your life should unfold. And we should play baseball, and we should do this. There's this sports activity and things like that. And he was interested in caimans, these little animals, kind of creature animals, and pet this or pet that. He wasn't interested at all in the things that I was interested in. And I didn't do a good job of raising that boy. And I think I have been, now almost 50 years later, I have been working to make amends for that. I mean, we have a great relationship. I email a couple times a week, talk about this. I could tell you where he is exactly today. But I completely misjudged that human being, because I was trying to turn that and value that human being in terms of my own
Hmm.
self-reflection.
Hmm.
And I had no understanding, and I've watched this happen time and time again, the difference in children in terms of music and athletic performance. One child was just absolutely terrified by public appearance, and the other child was kind of nonchalant about practicing, and then would show up. Oh, this was just off the charts good, both whether it's in sports, which he did a lot of, or whether it was in cello, which he also did a lot of. And he would never get nervous. One child completely nervous, the other child no nerves whatsoever. I was much more like the first, like the one that was highly nervous. So you have these people are just completely. I could go on and on and on with this. So what you come to do as a parent, this is what I didn't know. And then, of course, the same principle can be expanded to all of your relationships, whether you're dealing with people of color, people with disabilities, people with economic disadvantage, and so on and so on. You have to understand that there's a multitude of human experiences here, and each of them is to be valued. And that, in a way, was my great learning lesson of life. And I'm sure that I still have a lot to do learning in that regard going forward, to the limited extent that I have.
I appreciate you opening up and sharing that. You know, what I think of you and as one of and the my favorite professor at Yale, I think of you as a peak performer. So my next question would be, when it comes to your own high performance, what are some resources, whether they're tangible or intangible, that you've relied upon over the years to help you achieve so much?
I think one thing it sounds to be a strange thing to say. It really helps in life if you have a great partner. I don't care what your sexuality is, but it could it could be a partner writ large. Maybe it's a long term. Maybe it's just a great friend or something like that. Maybe there's no legal bond between the two of you. That's hugely. I've had a huge advantage because my wife is actually much smarter than I am, but she has a completely different kind of mind than I do. She was a Yale Summa. She's graduated from NYU Law School. She was a corporate lawyer for 35 years, senior partner at a law firm. So she has a completely different set, kind of education, and a completely different mindset than what I have. but I learn but the conversations that I've been able to have with her. I mean, we sit around the breakfast table. We're both retired now, and we'll just sit there and read. And here, have you seen this? Have you seen this? All this kind of, or she'll argue with me, which really annoys the hell out of me, actually. but but then I have to discipline myself, and I said, Craig, you've got to relax here. You've got to take a deep breath now, but don't talk slowly. Because that's demeaning. It turns out. So that's one thing that I think is hugely important, and maybe a lot of that is just luck. Another thing that might be luck too is generally good health, but that's not. They say, and I have no reason to disbelieve it, that your health is 30, maybe 30 to 40% genetic, and the rest is you. You can, and if we had a video here, you could see that I'm tall, thin, and I would like to think in reasonably good shape. But you can diet. You can, and hugely important. And this is something I only belatedly came to realize. Sleep. Wow, is that important in your life? You can't, youngsters don't pay any attention to their sleep patterns and things like that. If you want to do yourself good things in terms of your health and your performance, read a lot about sleep, and begin to sleep in a way that is healthful and beneficiary. So I'm saying your diet is important, exercise is important, and sleep is greatly important as well.
I mean, this podcast is perfect for you because you've studied so many greats, and obviously your book answers the question that I ask every guest in greater detail. But for listeners who understand that success leaves clues, could you share with them on what you see as greatness looking like? How would you define greatness?
Well, as I do in the Genius book, and I don't think there's any reason to back off of this, I think a genius or a greatness is somebody that has the capacity to change the world, and has the vision and has the energy and perseverance to make the world a better place. Now, you don't necessarily have to win a Nobel Prize to do this, or to find a cure for cancer, or to run the Federal Reserve Board. You don't have to be at that level. It's possible, and I think this is worth thinking about too, that to change the world for the good through this high peak performance, that's what we all should strive for. We need that. The world won't improve. The world won't move forward. We won't have a COVID vaccine, et cetera. Our lifespan, quality of life won't be extended unless we do this. But at the same time, I'm willing to believe that, changing the world for the good, if everybody just went out there and tried to do an act of kindness, one or a couple of small things every day, maybe that, if we could start some program sort of doing that, that would be highly beneficial. So maybe that's changing the world for the good too. One is a kind of macro good for the entire world. One is a micro a view of things where you're just trying to help things out on a very, very local basis, maybe in your very small, on your street, your community, or county, or whatever it might happen to be.
Outstanding. And Hidden Habits of Genius, you could buy it on Amazon, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. I don't pay too much attention to it, but just one more of you goes in and reviews it, then I'm up to number 400. No, no, I'm kidding. That's a joke. I don't pay much attention to this, but no. It's that's you can buy it on Amazon if you want. It's a little bit more organized and focused than our somewhat discursive, but I think probing ramble that we've had here today, Mark.
No, I really appreciate you coming on. I had 10 more questions to ask you, but I'm very conscious of your time. I appreciate our evolving relationship. It's been great to get to know you post Yale, and I look forward to deep conversations like this for years to come.
Yeah, and stay in touch when if you get back, when you get back in town, so to speak. Not that you're in my town, but close enough. We'll have to get together. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you to all members of the audience for putting up with me.
Thanks.